Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Audit Committee for the 18th of September 2024, and welcome to anybody watching along online, whether it's live or recorded. We will start this evening with apologies for absence.
Yeah, we've had apologies from Councillor Ho and Councillor Woodward.
And I believe we're accepting a rolling apology from Councillor Robertson.
We are indeed, yes.
Good. And we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. We'll pick those through by page 5, page 6, page 7 and page 8. Any issues to raise? No, thank you. On to item 4, outstanding audit recommendations. So at the last meeting, we discussed inviting managers along to talk to some outstanding audit recommendations within their areas. I would ask members to note that this is a collegiate process. It's not so much an interrogation, but a way of helping to identify any issues that we might be able to help with, and just highlighting what the council can do to close those issues. There were a number of items sent out to you as part of the minutes, part of the agenda. Again, some of those are for public discussion. There are a number that are for private discussion for security reasons. Anybody have any points they wish to raise on those items? No, we might whip through this quite quickly. So there are a large number of items, and I want to say thank you to Ian and to Kerry for coming along to talk to those. So we deliberately, in consultation with Andrew, the internal audit manager, we deliberately picked these two areas, this area, because of the large number, but also because both of the managers here are familiar with the committee process. And therefore a nice ease into the member to show you how collegiate and friendly we can be. So it kills two birds with one stone. I think in general, just looking through these, there's a large number of them that appear to be either just closing or just about to close, and potentially a number that we can no longer need. Do you have any general comments in relation to that, Kerry or?
So yes, I'd say obviously Ian's gone through each of them and provided an update to the committee, both in terms of whether we believe they're open or closed, and the ones that remain open, just a bit of an update as to where we are with progress. So of the published recommendations, I believe only 10 now remain open, and so we've included a revised date for those and a commitment to ensure that they are completed. As you'd expect, IT is an area of the business that quite rightly is subject to a significant number of audits. And a lot of work has been undertaken over the last 18 months to enhance our infrastructure and security. And the IT team itself has been through quite a transition during that time. So as their leadership team member, I do feel the team's in a really good place, actually, and we always welcome internal audit and their recommendations and findings, and try and work as positively as possible to move those forward as quickly as possible. Some of the recommendations have been historical recommendations, and that's due to a bit of a sequencing of trying to get the actions in the right order to make sure that we can box them off appropriately. Ian, anything you'd like to add?
To be honest, you've covered most of it there, so nothing massively significant. I mean, yeah, we are working forwards on trying to get as many of these completed and closed as possible. Not so much to actually close off the audit recommendations, but it's the underlying principles on which these are built. So especially when we're talking about things like cybersecurity, sometimes that may mean that our what we're going to be putting in place may conflict with what the recommendation was, and then there's a conversation we can have and we'll have with audits on what that is. Sometimes just the landscape and the situation changes as time passes on. So some of these are a revised view on best practice since it's completed. But yeah, I'm happy to take questions on any of the specific items on there.
Yeah. So, I mean, from my perspective, it is reassuring to see so many of them can be closed or will be closed shortly, subject to sampling from internal audit, I understand. In addition to seeking reassurance for the committee's sake purpose, part of this process is also to identify any needs that you have in order to assist with closing that. Is there any particular assistance that the committee can provide? Anything we can help to escalate to assist you in meeting these needs?
Realistically, I don't think there is, to be honest. I mean, you know, these are all things that lie within our remit and the scope of what we can do. Where things exist that we can't do, then we would reach out and say, look, we need to get some external assistance with this. Although places where we can do that, where we've got existing channels by which we can do that, we do that. So yeah, but in terms of, you know, there's nothing specific to say, please help us with this.
Sorry, yeah, Thomas.
If I may ask a question. Thank you very much, Chair. You know, I was just wondering whether what the ramifications were of the CrowdStrike problem which arose on the 19th of July. And I know that all too well because I spent 12 hours at Birmingham. Our aeroplane never took off. We sat on it for 2 hours, but it never took off. It caused massive worldwide chaos. Were we in any way affected by that? And if so, how long was it before we could consider ourselves up and running again?
Sure. So I was due to fly to Birmingham Airport the very next day, so I had similar concerns. However, it was a day I wasn't working, but I was in touch with the team as it was emerging, because yeah, it was one of those things. We all turned on the radio that morning, hearing it, and the first thing you go is, "Are we okay?" Which, you know, so we did those things in checks. Initially, it was Microsoft who were being blamed for that, but as time progressed, it did turn out to be CrowdStrike, as you rightly say, an AV provider. We felt reassured as that news emerged, and also by the fact we hadn't seen any impacts, that we weren't affected. And as the day progressed and as that problem progressed on a global scale, we ourselves and our systems were unaffected. The thing that it's brought to mind for us was about supply chain. So yeah, we knew using a number of cloud providers, and it was which of our cloud providers, which of our application providers could be impacted by this. As it was, there was only one provider who came forward on that one, so we were untouched by that particular issue.
We sort of dodged a bullet there, didn't we?
To an extent. I mean, it did also, actually, from an audit perspective, one of the things that it has led us to think about within ICT and look at our procedures is about the updating of software and the, you know, and security patches. So this was an AV tool, and it was an update to the AV patches that caused this to go down. Recommendations are often update early, you know, switch on auto updates. In doing that, we actually hand over a certain amount of control to suppliers. So it's something we're considering. You know, do we stick with the auto updates? Do we stick with auto updates -1? So we've got, you know, the rest of the world to beta test this thing for them. You know, and so it's where in our release management cycle we allow the updates to go out.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think the last couple of days has highlighted in extreme the risks of supply chain attacks as well, globally. Andrew, I think could I ask you to let the have your comments on how we then close out these issues that are completed or near to completion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Previously, it was agreed when leadership team last reviewed the outstanding audit recommendations that internal audit would take a review of those closed out recommendations and do that on a sample basis. proposing is that we continue on with that and then do a sample of and between 10 and 20% of the closed recommendations. What we would do is ask Jot, who is our ICT auditor, to cast his eye over those. Once we've got that assurance, then I'm happy for those then to be removed from the outstanding audit recommendations listing. Think it's part of that process or rolling process that we're going to also be having. We've got quarterly reviews of outstanding audit recommendations, and the next review will start on the 1st of October. So effectively, senior management will get listings of their outstanding audit recommendations, and then we'll follow up those in a similar manner. Again, I'm very happy with the comments received from Ian and Kerry in relation to that. And again, we are here to support both of them in respect of that. And if there needs to be more information, as in an explanation of the recommendations, then obviously our ICT auditor is be able to do that.
And we have a good dialogue.
You have a good dialogue with Jot. So,
any final comments on? Okay. Thank you both. Kerry, I think this is the only item you were due to hear before, was it? Or?
I'm going to stay for data protection if that's okay, Chair.
Well, thank you both, and I hope you can now go back to other managers that we may inform future meetings to tell them agrees we are.
Absolutely report.
Thank you. Cheers. And I think therefore we can skip item 5, the inclusion of the public, and item 6, and move on to item 7. Andrew, do you?
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to present to the committee my annual report and provide an update on counter fraud within Lichfield District Council. I ask that you endorse the contents of the update report. As the committee will be aware, internal audit carries out a review of the systems of control at the council, and this is based around the management of risk, which includes fraud. I report to this committee on a quarterly basis concerning the work of internal audit and provide an annual assurance statement within my internal audit annual report. During the year, we have continued to be included within the National Fraud Initiative, which is the Cabinet Office's data matching service. Matches are reviewed and investigated as required, and responses made to NFI and fellow partners within the initiative. There will be a refresh of data match sets, which will be uploaded by the required submission date of the 1st of October 2024. I've also reviewed and, in line with my delegation, made minor changes to the Council's counter fraud policies, and these are contained in the 4 attached appendices. All changes are highlighted in yellow within the documents. Changes only apply to the Council and not LWMTS, and all policies will be retained and maintained on the Council's intranet and website. In addition, all staff will be required to sign up to the policies. With this process, I'm also aware that documents are extensive in nature, and I'm currently reviewing these to bring them into a shorter, more readable format, 1 and 2 pages. The employee sign-up process will incorporate e-learning tools to require that policies have been read and positive agreement to comply with those requirements. I'm more than happy to take any questions you have on the policies.
Thank you. And I think we did have a media coverage of this in Lichfield Live recently, with where they identified a failure of councillors to complete their GDPR training. So it is in the public eye at the moment. Any questions on this item? Okay. We discussed last week the putting together some précis, some short plain English guides to this, to help aid staff and councillors who might have to complete any review or to read these documents, to help them understand that. And I thank you for taking that on board. No questions, then we will quickly skip on to item 8, PFCC poll card printing investigation report. Elections and Democratic Manager.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your patience. I was going to bring this report earlier than now, but another electoral event kind of took precedence. So it was something I wanted to bring to you all because, as you may be aware, there was a data breach with the printing of our poll cards for the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner election back in May. And I may call that the PFCC election for short. So in essence, what I want to do tonight, Chair, is report what happened, what we did immediately, and then what we've done longer term to make sure this doesn't happen again. So a bit of background for especially anybody that's watching. Poll cards, you don't need them to vote. However, we are required by legislation to send it to every elector. So they do have one. So that's the first thing. And there is some legislation that tells us kind of the layout of a poll card and the information that should be in there. So I just want you to understand that background because it will become important. The next bit of background is actually how we distribute and how we send out poll cards, and it's to do with the electoral timetable. When an election is called, we will do what we call our first run of poll card printing, and that is to everybody that we know is on the register at that point, to tell them that there is an election, and it will tell them if they are to go to a station where their station is, or if they're going to, we have them on record of having a postal vote and how they could cancel that if they wanted to. And that is actually the majority of the poll cards that's going out. And at PFCC, our total electorate was about just over 80,000. So that was the majority of those poll cards. And we didn't have an issue with that. Then the electoral timetable, there is a deadline for anybody to register to vote. So it may be they suddenly realise they didn't tell us that they'd moved, or they've just come to the area and there is a deadline for them to register. We will then do what we call a second run print of poll cards to those individuals. And it is that second run where there was a problem. And it was just over 1,200. So what actually happened? I was driving in. It'll be one of those things. Where were you when you got told there had been a data breach in your area? So I was driving in, and we suddenly, it was I think a Friday, and we were getting a lot of calls to say that people had received that second lot of poll cards and there was a problem. Now you'll see in front of you, you kind of have two bits of paper and they are folded up, and we've done it in that way because that's actually how the poll cards would go to the elector. So if you pick up Appendix 1 and it says old template, what had happened is on the front there is an area that would have the name and address, and it is actually heat sealed, these documents, and when electors had opened them up, you will see the actual poll card information. It would have the elected details, their name and address. It was somebody else's name and address. And we are sure it was every one of that second run, so just over 12,000 that had been affected. The first thing we did that morning, as soon as I arrived and I knew this was happening, we checked the integrity of our data. Because it is handy to know we don't print these in-house because of the nature of them, the volume, we just don't have capacity. I don't think there's probably any council, maybe the very big ones like Birmingham would have their own printers, but everywhere else we use a national third party who are used to handling this data and what needs to be done for election printing. So we checked our integrity of our data. That was absolutely fine. So we immediately called the printers and told them what had happened. We were assured that we would be told within 20 minutes if anything had happened their end. They came back within 10 minutes to say, yes, it was their error. Now, I'm not a printer, but I will try and explain, and I have tried to put diagrams in the report, but it's to do with how they pre-imposed in their system how this template was laid out, and in essence they should have said it was work and tumble, where they'd put into their system it was work and turn, or the other way. But in essence, there is a diagram that's kind of explaining where they would have on their screen probably two lots of kind of forms, and they would say the data goes on the one side and then the other side, and then on, you know, page 4 and 5, etc., on their template, but they'd actually programmed it to be the other way round. But in essence, it was their error. And they immediately said they will do a full investigation and come back with kind of things that they will do to prevent this happening again. But we needed to solve the problem straight away. So the first thing we did, of course, was go to our data protection officer to tell him what happened and to get his advice. He came back and said it wasn't deemed, because it was just names and addresses, that by the Information Commissioner's Officer guidance is not deemed special category data. So that means very, very sensitive data. If you think a name and address is what you would find on an envelope, kind of your very sensitive data would be things like your medical records, any bank details, things like that. It didn't include that. What he said was, yes, we needed to tell the affected people to destroy that incorrectly printed poll card. So knowing that, we went back to the printers, and they'd already agreed that they would print the poll cards again, and they would actually put at the top that this was a replacement poll card and that they must destroy anything previously sent to them. So that was the first thing. Even though our data protection officer didn't feel that it was a breach that was reportable to the ICO, because it wasn't that very sensitive data, your returning officer, also your chief exec, did feel that we needed to give confidence back to the electors, especially those affected. So we reported it anyway, and the findings from the ICO and the decision of that reporting is in the report. Let me just, it's at 3.7. So again, they were satisfied, and we were already doing what they came back with. So they were satisfied that we were going to reissue, and we had told people to destroy their current one and to do an investigation, which the printers were already committed in doing. So we're getting quite close to the election at this point, so we needed to get these poll cards out. And this was on a Friday, and the election was going to be the Thursday next week. After some discussion between ourselves and the printers, we actually decided we weren't going to post them. We wanted them back. We could double, triple check the reprints to make sure the same issue hadn't happened, because like I said, they are heat sealed at the printers. But if we had them before we got them out, we could have that reassurance and that triple check. So they actually agreed, the printers, they were going to print them straight away and courier them up to us, which they did. And we actually had them sent to an officer's address, because it was a Saturday, who then brought them in. And a number of us came in on the Sunday to sort them out. Yes, we did a double check with a select few where we had permission, we could open them up. And we actually then put them into ward areas. Mr. Stevenson was one of them, and I am very grateful for him coming in on a Sunday. So we put them roughly into ward areas that we knew, and we started that night to actually get them out. So I took some, I did the Meads Valley area, so did Will. And then on the Monday, we put a call out to our staff to ask for help to get these hand delivered. And actually, Chair and members, I want to actually highlight something. If you want reassurance that we now have a one council culture, this is it. Because I was a bit worried that people wouldn't be willing to help. They came in their droves, and it was all levels of the authority coming to help. I can tell you that your section 151 officer willingly went out. He did then complain because I may not have been slightly honest about the size of area I gave him. So, sorry, your monitoring officer went out. We had apprentices going out during their lunch breaks. And finally, along with a lot of other officers, your operational services came out, especially the Burntwood area, which was quite dense, so there were a number there. And I remember seeing them, they sat in the car park, reordered them to what they know from their bin rounds, and they went out that day. And they were all delivered, I think, by the Tuesday evening, Wednesday morning latest. So I was satisfied. And like I said, very, very grateful to the officers in this organisation and some external people who were already here helping with postal votes. They were all there. So everybody that needed that poll card ready for that election, they had it in time. And we had the decision from the ICO. But that solved that immediate thing. Me being the petulant kind of toddler that I am, I kept asking, but why is the poll card like that? Is there a need? Because it's happened once. And yes, I was very reassured from our printers that everything they'd put in place and their new processes would work. However, was there actually a risk that this could happen again? Did there need to be a risk that this could happen again? And quite frankly, there wasn't. There is regulations, and that's your Appendix 3 to say how a poll card can look and the information in it. I was also lucky enough that some people that lived out of area were allowed me to see their poll card, so I could see what other authorities do. I myself live out of area, so I'd got an idea from that authority. And there was absolutely no need for the poll card to be this way. In essence, with the old design, the template that I inherited before taking over, they'd done the front of the poll card in essence to look like an envelope. And I kind of get it, but there is absolutely no need. And the legislation actually says there is no need. So what we have done, and that is your Appendix 2, is redesign it. And what this does, it only lists the name and address of the elector once. So there is no risk to the printers that they can actually have this mismatch again. So in a way, it was lucky, although it did mean we had to work on it quicker than what we thought, because we only had around about a 3-week gap between the one election and the other election. But we did work on it, and I can report to you that this new template went out with no print issues, no problems. I will report that we received one complaint out of the 70 odd that we sent. His complaint was that his name and address and elector number was on the outside. However, we've already said that's not sensitive data. Your elector number isn't sensitive data because it cannot be used for any other purposes. And if there were concerns that somebody could steal the poll card, take it to a polling station and say, there's my name and address and elector number, because of voter ID, there would still be, it wouldn't be able, impossible for that person to try and fraudulently vote. So we are satisfied that this new template has solved the issue, and it means the risk of any print error and therefore data breach cannot happen again. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what happened and what we've done. So I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Yeah,
Thank you for that comprehensive run through what happened and the solution and where we are in terms of going forward. I would imagine all the members of the committee would like to echo your thanks to the officers and other members of the council who to resolve this in quite a prompt way.
Thank you, Chair. I just made a note actually to almost reiterate what you've just said. What you've just said, Chris, there proves the level of determination to make this work in a situation which was totally beyond our control. And I think the way that the officers worked assiduously to remedy this unfortunate set of circumstances was quite remarkable. And I think it needs to be put on record that all the officers concerned should be congratulated and thanked very much for their work.
Absolutely.
I think you saved the day effectively. It could have been fairly disastrous, and I think you averted a bit of a disaster there.
Yes, and like I said, it was absolutely a team effort between us. The printers who, and you will see, haven't charged us for that reprint and using the courier. Yes, there will be a small amount of kind of charge where we have paid for officers' time or their mileage, but actually that's relatively low. And I do want to put on record the other department that was integral was our customer services, because they were taking the calls. Of course, we were keeping them informed, but them dealing with those inquiries and the worries and understandable worries of our electors did mean, because they were taking that on so very well, we could concentrate in solving the issue and working with our printers and getting people out to redistribute these new ones. So yes, with your indulgence, please, Chair, I would like to have it on record for our customer services as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other comments? The only other question I have, do we know whether this issue at the printers affected any other?
As far as I'm aware,
Or was
no.
it just us? So we're the
Yeah.
only people, we're the only
A
council.
lot of that is down to, I think we may be one of the only few people who had this sort of template, which, like I said, I think is unnecessary. And like I said, I've worked with the printers with the new templates, and it may be something they want to send out to those others. But it's one of those, they've put a system, even though we don't need it anymore, they have put a new kind of process in place to make sure anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think that takes us on to item 9. New report of the Data Protection Officer.
Hello again. Yeah, the data protection officer, Colin Cook, he works for myself, so I'll present the report on his behalf. I mean, yeah, so the report is there. The report is there in the pack to sort of lead you through some of the main points of it. We've presented an update on the completion rates of the GDPR and cyber security training that's been undertaken across the council. I think one of the things to mention about this isn't a measure of whether people have undertaken GDPR or cybersecurity training. It's a measure of something we call certification. So the training that we put out there on the platform, we require people to update that on an annual basis. So I think there may be a concern or a misconception, perhaps, that people have not had any training. People, the small number of people there who are in the exceptions, they have, but they've just not completed it within the last 12 months. The numbers that are in the report there, it's always a moving feast because the anniversary of training isn't from the point when we set it, it's from the point when people have completed it to the next completion. So this is a rolling thing, and it's part of the processes that the data protection officer panels on a monthly basis, basically to review and chase up people who are who have not completed. We have the option to suspend accounts of people who have not completed as a last resort, because obviously that prevents them from doing their work and also prevents them from getting onto training. So there's a little bit of a challenge for us there. So but we chase people down in order to get them to complete or taking that drastic measure. We have taken that drastic measure on some occasions recently, and then had to manage those people through to getting back on. I can give a slightly updated set of figures from what was in the report there, if I can find my notes. Sorry, I'm flipping between several things here. So we are at, across staff, we are currently sitting at 93% have got their certification on GDPR, and 92% of staff on their cybersecurity.
Just before Ian moves on, just to add, as Ian said, it is a constant moving feast, that stat, because of, as Ian said, it's based on everyone's individual anniversary dates. I would also just add there are some legitimate reasons why people might have their 12-month anniversary might have expired. So, for example, colleagues that are on maternity leave or long-term sick, etc. So there are some reasons why, and legitimate reasons why, they might not have completed it in time as well.
We also do have a few people who are their occasional users of ICT, part-time workers who are working in field-based roles. So they're not sat in front of a computer all day, every day, because they're out there, in the bins picking up litter, working in the parks, and so trying to get those people to help them to complete requires a little bit more handholding.
I think 100% completion is always going to be a touch out of reach for various reasons.
We're always aiming to be as high as we can on that.
Yeah. And I think 93% sounds like quite a decent target, a decent limit to hit. Any questions? Points? Yes.
I'm just reading on page 79, which is part of this report, about FOI requests.
Yes.
I'm quite surprised at the number of FOIs that were requested. Actually, 342.
We do receive.
That seems quite a lot.
We receive a lot of FOIs, and that is increasing. It is something that's does take up officer time. The dealing with FOIs. I must say, I observe, especially in the ICT, I observe a trend of quite a lot of sales approaches. Organisations wishing to find out information about about what we use, what we procure, what our contract cycles might be, and they're using FOI as a means to get at that information, as opposed to cold calling, in fact.
If I may come back on that, that sounds to me as though it's almost an abuse of the FOI system, and slightly disingenuous if they're using it for that purpose. And it does concern me the amount of officer time that's being used to satisfy these requests. It's
a difficult one to balance, because obviously there's clear guidance in legislation around constitutes an FOI. I think, as we've put in the report, what we're doing is trying to work with service areas to, especially those FOIs that are frequently asked. Let's get the information up on our website. Let's save officer time. Let's reduce and try and reduce the numbers coming in by directing people to our web pages first and looking at what other open data we've got available to see if that answers their questions, to divert some of them as well. But it is a really tricky balance. There's only, I think, certain criteria that means we can say a request isn't under the FOI legislation. So it is a challenge, but we are working, I'd say, with service areas to get more of those frequently asked ones up there and look at what other data we can get out there to reduce the demand on officers.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. With regard to staff training and particularly councillor training, and I know this is an issue that this committee has touched on a few times over the last 12 months, and I hold my hand up here. I've started the GDPR training 3 separate occasions and not quite got around to finishing it. So I personally, and that's not through any lack of interest or a decision not to pursue it. Just in a busy lifestyle, it does kind of get left behind. So I personally, as a councillor, would welcome somebody giving me an occasional, I'll use the word nudge, to get it completed. I don't know whether we've progressed in working with the political groups on council as to how we do that, and whether we can engage with the leaders to chase up their own councillors.
So there are built into the system, in order to reduce the amount of time spent by data protection officer in chasing people down on completion. There's automated reminders that go around reminding people it's there. There comes a point where people become fatigued by that, and they go, "Oh yeah, I'm being nagged about that again," and it needs to go to another level to start to threaten in a way. We have considered putting well, we are looking at changing the later ones to put in the more threatening messages, let's say. But as regards with councillors, yes, and I'm aware of the conversation that's been had about, because it's not mandatory for councillors to complete because not being council employees. So it is down to yourselves and your parties to do that. I think, yes, we can ask the leaders of the parties to help support that, and perhaps we have, I think in the past, shared information with the leaders of the parties as to what the completion rates across their parties are.
And I think councillors in general have access to all the same systems that would potentially cause GDPR problems, or is the access restricted for councillors, but do they have access significantly less of the systems, and therefore the risk is less? It's a
different set of risks. I mean, so for councillors, you won't have access to the systems that are holding the same levels of personal data that officers have, and so the risks, then perceived risks, perhaps to the public, are reduced. So I would say significantly. You will have certain amounts of information that you'll have come across in your dealings with members of the public, things they will have emailed to you, information they may have passed around that. So the training for councillors is to make you aware of GDPR within the context of what you are holding.
And just for councillors, if they were to be reminded that they'd failed to complete GDPR course, perhaps by reading it in the local media, how would they access that course? Because I know I found I could not access that course myself for a 4th time to try and get it finished.
So right, okay, so the links as to where to access it are in what gets emailed out to everybody.
So I followed that link, and it was,
yes,
possibly because it's timed out.
What I think occurred in the last week or so, because I think there's been a little bit of a push from some councillors to complete their training, and I know from speaking from a couple of your colleagues, when they landed at the page, maybe the login process was slightly confusing. We've had the wording changed on that homepage now to give better guidance on how to log in. So I think that will probably address the issue you faced there.
Thank you. Any other points? No.
Sorry, Chair. I just wanted to make a point about data breaches, obviously given the previous agenda item as well. So there is information in the report on data breaches. You'll note that we have seen an increase in data breaches reported to the DPO in 2023-24. Just for some context, we believe that there's probably been historical underreporting of data breaches. So we've, again, especially in the last 12 months, been working with service areas to encourage them to come and report data breaches to the DPO, again, as per an earlier item, in a collegiate way and in a supportive way. If colleagues can report them as soon as they occur, like with the poll cards that we've discussed previously, the DPO can then help and support and make sure we're putting in place mitigations and actions as that incident is live to try and mitigate any further risk. We can obviously make that assessment as to whether it's a breach that requires reporting to the ICO. And importantly, again, we can help the service with lessons learned as well, and trying to mitigate a potential data breach happening again. And again, as per the previous conversation, unfortunately, data breaches will happen, even with the best mitigations in place and the best action plans in place. Sometimes things are beyond our control as well, but it's important, as per the previous agenda item, in terms of how we respond and how quickly we respond when they happen.
Okay. Thank you very much, both. And I think the recommendation was to note that. I think we've noted, and thank you both.
Thank you.
We now move on to item 10, statement of accounts 23-24. And we were all very grateful for some training last week on this issue. So I'm sure we're all primed with pages and pages of questions for Anthony.
So I'll take this in conjunction with the next item, which is the external auditors. They do go nicely together.
Yes.
So just on my particular part of it, so we're in the fortunate position that up to 22-23, all of our statement of accounts have been audited, received unqualified opinions from our previous external auditors, Grant Thornton. However, if you look at the wider sector, this was as at April this year, only 21% of local authority audits have been finalised for 22-23. 63% were awaiting sign-off and 16% had been unpublished. For 21-22, if you go back a further year, 54% have been signed off, 38% remain as drafts and 8% are yet to be published. So in total, there's around 390 audits in the last 2 financial years that are yet to be finalised, which is a significant number. So this is our first year with Assets as our new external auditors. Therefore, they've inherited quite a good starting position for this year's audit, and for future years, they're not in the position that they've got 2, 3, 4, 5 years to sign off. No assurance over opening balances, and the deadlines that the government are imposing for sign off fastly approaching. So just on our set of accounts, so the draft or unaudited statement of accounts, which are part of the pack for 23-24, was signed on the 27th of June, and we placed them on the council's website the same day. We didn't achieve the 31st of May deadline for the draft accounts because we were still awaiting pension information from the actuary for the pension fund. We needed to do that to ensure the draft accounts were based on the most accurate pension information, by reducing the risk of audit adjustments when new information became available. Deadline for completion of this external audit was to be the 30th of September. However, the new government recently outlined new backstop dates for external audit, and for the 23-24 financial year, that will move to the 28th of February 2025. I hope we don't have to use that backstop date. So based on this draft set of unaudited accounts 23-24 and the external auditor's draft audit findings report, which is the next agenda, we're looking to get some delegations to the chair and the vice chair to approve the letter of representation. So that's assurance from management that all matters that could affect the council's financial position in the financial statements have been disclosed to the external auditors. That's normally signed by the chair and the chief exec and myself. An approval to make minor changes to the statement of accounts. So if they are grammatical, they're note based, they're not material to the primary statements. And then once the audit's complete and we've received the audit opinion, to actually sign the accounts off on behalf of the council. That's all I wanted to say, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Anybody want to step in with questions at this point? I note from the recommendations approved minor changes defined as material changes to the core statements. What's materiality for that?
It's about
Yeah, so it's included in our report actually. So the overall materiality for the accounts is just over £1 million. We use sort of a benchmark against that for our testing, which is £750,000, and we're required to report any errors to you that are over £53,000.
Have to be size of back to the committee.
Yes.
Effectively.
Okay. And then the delegation obviously signed the accounts once we received assurance from the pension fund. Okay. Do we have any questions? I think we touched on some questions in the training. But I'm guessing everybody is happy with the
Maybe
position on
to help me, just on the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. And because I think that was one of the points in the training, that there are some quite material changes in that statement from one year to the next. So if I just work down, probably these will be more familiar to members. And so why did a good council, for instance, change by or reduce by about 1.8 million from one year to the next? So you didn't have in 23-24 any expenditure related to the council being a better council. Was all undertaken in 22-23. We transferred assistant directors from the chief exec cost centre, which sits under good council, to other areas which strategic priorities. We received extra income from government and the county council for the cost of Ukrainian grants in 23-24. And then we've got a couple of things like the communications team transferred from the council, which used to sit under this responsibility, to LWMTS. So that sits under a different strategic priority. And lastly, we had some restructure costs in 22-23, which we didn't have in 23-24. If I look at developing prosperity, that was a net reduction of about 1.1 million. That was down to things like additional income from the incubator space in the district council house, which is now in 23-24. The revenue costs for setup of the cinema project, so the feasibility, the legal costs to implement the cinema project. We got some additional car parking income, and we no longer had any spend related to COVID in 23-24. If I look at enabling people, which is probably the biggest change in expenditure and income, that's solely down to the insourcing of leisure centres. So we've now got the expenditure related to leisure centres and the income that we retain on behalf of those centres. Previously, we just had a net figure, which was a payment to or from Freedom as the operator. And then finally, on the shape in place, net change of about 2.8 million. Lower professional fees on the local plan at that stage. I suspect that will increase as we move forward. We didn't have the purchase of blue bags. So previously from implementation in 22-23, we still had some purchases around that, and that wasn't in 23-24. But on the income side, we had lower recycling income. And we had quite a lot of additional grant income towards funding capital projects, which appears in this statement, but then is transferred to the capital pots on the balance sheet.
Yeah, just a question, please. So on page 42, we've got the usable reserves, unusable reserves. There's an increase in both of those for 23-24 as opposed to 22-23. Is this to do with the movement in reserve statement?
Yeah. So just as a general point on that, the usable reserves are the ones we can spend. The unusable are the ones that we can't spend. And the normal reasons for unusable reserves changing are changes in things like valuations of the pension fund or valuations of assets. So they tend to be unrealised gains at that time. If you sold an asset, you would then obviously you'd realise.
It's almost hypothetical.
Yeah, and they're based on judgments of actuaries and values. Usable ones tend to be sales of assets, revenue grants, reserves that we can spend.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
On the balance sheet, there's an item for assets held for sale, which is for 1.5 million. What does that?
Right, so assets held for sale are where you've got an asset that at the date of the policy, so the 31st of March, if it's no longer going to be used to deliver services and its value will be recouped from sale, then it transfers into a category known as assets held for sale. And the site I'm talking about here is the former garage site that's adjacent to the council offices. So at the balance sheet date, we were marketing that for sale, which hopefully will be realised within this financial year.
A couple of queries on the notes to the accounts. It actually says the next election is on 2023, which surely it should be 2027. That's on page 170 on it. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what page it is on. And the other thing, the art collection was last valued in 2000. When's it likely to be revalued again?
That is a good question. When we had the valuation done, I think we bought somebody with a specialist knowledge of arts, etc. We haven't done that recently, partly because I think it's a fairly static collection, and partly because I don't think a lot of it's actually stored, let's just say. So I'm not certain we will value it, to be honest, at this point in time. I'm not sure there is the need to do it at this point in time because, as I say, it's a static collection that's stored. And I think the only reason we value it is probably for insurance purposes in any case.
One that occurs on page 169 from the agenda, 79 from page 79 from the report, short-term creditors. Do we know what our average payment dates are? Do we meet the 30-day ideal deadline?
So from memory, when we report, because we report this quarterly to Cabinet and Review and Scrutiny Committee, it's about 93% are paid within 30 days.
Seems like a fairly good amount.
I mean, our target is 90. Cabinet's aspiration is to move to the 100%, and we have got quite a positive direction of travel of this in the last few years.
Councillor Strachan, did you?
I was just going to say, I think it was 93.13 on the last Cabinet report, but it is trending upwards now that we've got some things in place in a couple of problematic departments.
That seems like a very accurate figure, so I'll take you at your word. Any other questions?
I just ask a question, Chair, please. On page 80, we've got outstanding legal cases, and the authority has one legal case in progress that has been provided for, municipal mutual insurance. What's the background to that?
So, I mean, this dates back quite a long time, but insurance was provided by a company called the Municipal Mutual Insurance Company. I'm not sure whether they're still in business, but there is still a number of claims that are outstanding from that period, of which we've provided for the risk that they will be settled and there will be a financial implication to the council. I think we get an annual report which tells us what progress is and what we're not. It's having to make a final, so that.
But it's not a severe impact, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, each year in theory, it should reduce as cases are settled. And I think a lot of councils are in this situation because I've got a feeling the MMI, as they were called, did insure most local authorities back in the day.
Thank you.
So we have some recommendations at 2.1. So we note the external draft audit findings, which we'll come on to in detail. We note the draft statement of accounts, and we approve the delegation to approve the letter of representation, approve any minor changes, and to sign the accounts. Do I need someone to propose and second those, or just show of hands? A show of hands to agree those. Yeah, thank you. And that takes us to item 11, the report of the external auditors.
Thanks, Chair. So as Anthony has said, the audit has been going on now for a couple of months, and we have the ambition to look to sign the audit opinion by the 30th of September. Again, as Anthony said, the government backstop arrangements has meant that that deadline has now moved to the 28th of February next year. However, we are still working to a 30th of September deadline for the completion of the audit work. We do think there could be the potential for it to go on a couple of weeks beyond that through the review processes. And we are also still waiting for pension assurances from the County Council auditors, KPMG. We had hoped to hear from them by the 13th of September, and Helen chased them on last week. And we are in communication with them, but we haven't got a formal date from them yet. But we expect that it will be weeks rather than months, which I know was a concern in prior years, which is positive. This is obviously a draft report, but at this point in the audit, we don't have anything significant to communicate to members. And you will see within there that there are no material audit adjustments that have been identified at this point in the audit. In terms of our significant risk areas, you'll probably recall that we had 3 that were presented within the plan. Our plan has remained the same since our planning procedures, and our materiality level has also remained the same. The first one of those risks is around the risk of management override of controls. So the risk that management are in a unique position and could manipulate the financial statements if they wanted to. You'll see in the detail of the report that that was still ongoing, but actually as of today, we are happy to say that that work has been completed and has been through a number of reviews, but is going through final review probably this week. That also is the same for our income and expenditure work, which was a rebutted risk within the audit anyway. The pieces of work that are still going on at the moment are the valuation of other land and buildings and the pension liability valuation. But as I said, we're still waiting for some communication with County Council auditors, as well as management's experts relating to both valuations. I'm going to pass over to Helen now, who will give an update on value for money.
Yeah, so the value for money work has been substantially completed. That's involved us having discussions with a number of officers at the council, as well as reviewing sort of key documents such as a medium-term financial plan and some of your policies and procedures. When we presented our audit plan to you, we said at that point we didn't think there was a risk of a significant weakness in your arrangements around VFM, and at this stage in our work we can confirm that we haven't identified any significant weaknesses. What we have done, I think you'll see in the report, is just identify another recommendation, and that is just in relation to how the council can improve its understanding of the cost of delivering services and comparing those to the benefits from those services that the council and your constituents receive. You might also notice that we've mentioned in the report around internal control recommendation, which is in relation to journals. So as Laura mentioned earlier, this is an area where management has got the opportunity to potentially commit fraud within the financial statements. One of the controls that we look at to see whether the council has in place is around whether Anthony's section 151 can post his own journals. He can't, he doesn't have access to the system. We did identify a small number of journals where Anthony had asked another member of the finance team to post them. However, we are comfortable that they were to do with a specific area of the accounts. It was to do with the collection fund, and actually they were in line with the normal course of business. They could be supported by working papers and things like that. And our understanding is that there are compensating controls. So other members of the finance team were involved in doing reconciliations between the collection fund and the general ledger. As part of the yearly process, it would pick up if there was some kind of anomaly from those journals. And also Anthony's journal entries are mainly created from what's called the SIPFA model. So actually they're fairly standard outputs from that model, and we look at that model as part of our testing. So we were quite comfortable that it's not causing a problem, but we still just wanted to bring it to your attention.
That's probably everything that we need to cover within the report, but if there's any questions, we're happy to answer.
Okay. Yeah, so on the risks and the management override of control, I think you pretty much answered the question in that, are you satisfied because they can't or because you've determined that they haven't?
So Anthony can't and he hasn't posted, but what we were concerned was around whether it was sort of a circumnavigation of a control. So sort of the substance of management over our control, but taking place via maybe coercion of another member of staff. We were comfortable that that's not the situation and that hasn't happened, and it was. We did then ask all staff whether we make inquiries to say, have you been asked to post journals that you thought were unusual outside, and everyone's responded saying no, they haven't been. So we were quite comfortable that there wasn't here a risk of management override.
I noted from your control recommendation that Anthony, I believe we've taken on some more resource so that you no longer have to deal with those areas where you might be suggesting
So
journals to be made.
Just so that it's clear, the reason I did it, we had vacancies in the team, and rather than let everybody take on too much, not achieve the deadline, I helped out basically around that. That was the reason.
Yeah.
Okay. So, any?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you. Yes, I mean, very much on the point that you were just making, Chair. The risk of material misstatement. When you read an auditor's report and it includes the words very high as a risk, that sort of gets the pulse racing a little bit and sort of gets alarm bells ringing as well. But I think you have answered the question, but it's mildly disconcerting to read those words very high in a report like this. And I'm suggesting that's not hyperbole, but there must have been a point at which you did feel as though that was an appropriate wording. Yeah. You're now satisfied that that wording is no longer appropriate, is that correct?
No, so I think what would probably be fair to say is that the auditing standards require every auditor to assess the risk of management override of controls as very high. That is the actual risk that exists. We are, however, happy that have not identified anything to suggest that that would be the case. So we aren't actually able to change that risk level. It is mandated under the auditing standards. Okay. It applies to everybody that would be audited.
I mean, to the layman like me, that just makes me think, oh dear, is there a problem there? But obviously, from a professional standpoint, you're used to that wording and you're very comfortable with it.
Yes, and I will take that on board actually, because maybe we could make that clearer in our report.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you,
Chair. So I was just going to say as well, this is one of the areas where auditing standards and the don't necessarily fit together. I think my question would be here, what is the incentive for management to misstate the accounts in the public sector? It's not like we get share bonuses. We're setting up values for takeovers, mergers. We need to increase the share price for whatever reason. So whilst I accept what Laura's said, my view of this is that we operate in a different risk environment and there is little to no incentive for us to override the control, like there may be in other parts of the economy.
Thank you.
If I might just add to that, the other risk that exists for all entities is the risk of fraud in revenue recognition. That again is prescribed by the auditing standards, but we are actually able to rebut that risk for public bodies. So we have done that here, but we don't unfortunately have the same opportunity to do that within management override of controls.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, and yeah, so finally, on the pension report, we're not expecting that to give us any level of delays as we've experienced in the past.
No, so I appreciate last year the pension fund auditor was Ernst & Young, and they did have a number of delays, and not just for yourselves, across a number of different pension funds. The auditors have changed this year. It's KPMG. As Laura mentioned, we've been in contact with them. I've had a number of calls with them. They know to be prioritising yourselves as you are in a position where your accounts could be signed off in time. So we are not expecting it to be the length of delays at Ernst & Young, and I know that they are working on it now.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, so we are myself back to Okay, so I think we have noted those. Track of the recommendations. Those, well, that was just a note, wasn't it? That's been the previous item. Thank you. Okay, and that takes us on to the work programme. We have we are into September, so November we've got 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 items that we want to cover in, including so the one item we haven't done yet today is the private meeting with the auditors that we'll do after the exclusion of the press and public, which hadn't been included in previous copies of the work programme. Any comments on the work programme? Anthony,
I'm just going to ask Laura or Helen, how confident are you with the auditor's annual report being available for the November meeting?
Confident.
Okay.
Obviously caveated by we need the assurances from KPMG, but yeah, confident.
Okay. Excellent. I think that brings us to the end of the public part of the meeting, and we come through to the exclusion of press and public, which requires me to read as publicity would be prejudicial to the public interest by reason of the confidential nature of the business to be transacted. The public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following item 13. Business would involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3, part 1, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972.